Charlotte Wales 8.3 administer 6 fitness tests. So after we interviewed our client, we picked up several things through their consultation, and I could create this profiling image for them to look more deeper in depth at what they needed improving. So our client was Harry Barnard. His date of birth is the 18th of September 2002. That makes him 18. His BMI was 22.7. His resting heart rate was 66 beats per minute, and his waist to hip ratio was 0.87. So looking at if he had any goals, he wanted to get back into being more active and eating better. He also was originally training to be a footballer before he was taken out with an injury. So we were looking to get him back into his regular football training schedule and back to playing games and matches. Do you smoke or drink? He smoked 3 cigarettes a day, but only drank occasionally. As his occupation was a full-time student, so we need to fit in around this sort of busy schedule that he has, where as well as going to school 5 times a week, he needed time to revise. Currently, his type of exercise was only a few walks. His fitness levels had dipped quite a bit, but he used to train quite heavily. When asked how often he went out for a walk, it was only really once a week. So this exercise he was doing wasn't every day. And then looking at how many steps he did in an average day, it was only 4,000. So as much as he was getting up a few steps, sort of walking around the house, he wasn't hitting 10,000 steps a day, which is ideal, especially for someone who's supposed to be living a very active lifestyle. We'd want these numbers to be much higher. If I asked how far he could run, then he was sort of suggesting only 1 kilometre before either the pain in his knee would kick in or he just couldn't carry on any longer. However, his levels of motivation to get back into this type of fitness was 8 out of 10, so it was looking quite high to get him back into this. So to originally test his fitness levels, we can use certain components of fitness to see where he's already at before we look at improving. So the components of fitness I chose were aerobic capacity, muscular endurance, power, flexibility, coordination, and speed. So for aerobic capacity, we can use the Cooper 12-minute run. So for this test, we would usually place markers at set intervals around the track to aid in measuring the completed distance. Participants then run for 12 minutes, and the total distance is covered and recorded. However, at the moment, this can't be completed how we would like it to, because we don't have the space. So our test was completed over a sort of larger distance, not over a set square. So rather than running around, say, a football pitch, Harry was required to just sort of run on the roads, which we aren't as reliable as other things. So usually for this, we would need a running track, cones, and a stopwatch. However, during these times, we can just use the stopwatch and just run. For muscular endurance, we can do the 1-minute sit-up test. So this is as simple as it sounds. You just complete as many sit-ups as you can in a minute with your knees bent and your feet flat on the ground. So long as they've got the correct technique, then this test can be completed anywhere. All is needed is a flat surface and a stopwatch. For the power, we can use a standing vertical jump, which can also be done pretty much anywhere. The participant just must measure their height when stood against the wall with a hand straight up in the air. They can then stand away from the wall, leap vertically as high as possible, and then you would measure the distance between the standing height and the jump height. We can do this for best of 3 so we can get an average out of it. So we need measuring tape or a marked wall. Obviously, it's easier to measure a wall than find a wall that's already marked. And then you can use chalk to measure the start height and then the end height. If we had the correct equipment on us, we would use a jump mat, which would far more accurately measure how long our participant was in the air, how high they jumped, and lots of other variables. For flexibility, we can use a sit and reach test. So an athlete should sit on the floor with their legs stretched straight ahead and their feet flat on a box. They shouldn't have any shoes on for this, really. They should reach forward as far as possible with their palms facing down and record how far their hands have reached from the end of the box. different sit and reach tests that measure slightly different. Some will measure past your toes, and some will measure from where the box starts. But it's all in variance to one another, and we would still look to improve this. So all that's needed for this was a ruler and a box, or you can, at home, you can use steps. So you sit at the bottom of your stairs and reach as far as you can. Then for the coordination test, we would use the alternate hand wall toss test, which is again quite easy. A mark is placed a certain distance from the wall, so it will be a few paces back, like sort of 6 or 7 paces away from the wall, but this is a set distance. The person then stands behind this line facing the wall. A ball is thrown from one hand in an underarm action against the wall and caught with the opposite hand, which is then repeated sort of vice versa for a whole minute. So you can see how many of these toss catches, you can do in a whole minute. So we'd need a tennis ball for this, a flat wall, marking tape just to make sure that this stood back a certain amount, and a stopwatch to time the full minute. Then for the speed test, we used a 30-metre sprint. So the test just involves running a single maximum sprint over 30 metres with the time recorded. So just run from one cone to the next, which is a distance of 30 metres as fast as they can. So we'd use measuring tape to measure out this distance, a stopwatch to see how fast they can do it, cones so they know where they're starting and where they're finishing, and they must have enough space at the end of the cone so that they've got enough space to stop so that they don't have to slow down before they finish their sprint. Ideally for this we would use timing gates, but under the set conditions and trying to do this from home, we don't have access to these. So in justifying our tests, the aerobic capacity Cooper run is a very reliable test. In 1968, the man who created the Cooper run test reported a correlation of 0.90 between the VO2 max and the distance covered in a 12-minute walk or run. So the reliability of this test would depend on the practice. So the practice our athlete has had, the pacing strategies they're using, and the motivation level that they have. So if Harry did this on a Monday at 8 a.m, he might do better than if he tried to do it on a Friday at 8 p.m. So when testing this, we must take note of when this test is completed, and when using it again, we would then repeat these conditions. The test itself is suited to our client because as part of his sport, they run up and down a football pitch, so they're in need of this good cardiovascular fitness. We want them to have a high score for this, ideally, and taking part in a Cooper run requires minimal equipment, just the correct spacing. So although when we did complete this test, we didn't do it as ideally as we would like it, he's still run for 12 minutes, which is the data we need. And the test is quite valid. It can be repeated as many times as we need it to do. And it can also be used as a really good improvement level. So we can compare after, say, a 6-week training program, how well they did in the first one versus the second one. For muscular endurance with the sit-ups, the reliability of this test is quite high because it's easily repeatable to gather consistent and non-varied data. The validity doesn't measure an overall muscular endurance because it's more focused on the abdominals. So it's not as reliable as a gold standard test. However, it is very easy to conduct. You only need the correct spacing. You don't need specialist equipment, and it's suited to the client. One, because he has the ability to do this test. He's not in any way sedentary or unable. And he also needs a high muscular endurance to activate fast twitch fibres to allow him to explode down the pitch as he should do in football. And because he has been sedentary for so long at this point, about 7 months with his injury, his muscular endurance will have decreased quite dramatically. So we would look to want to improve this if it is low. For power, when we use a standing vertical jump, the reliability is quite high because it's easily tested and retested for these reliable results. The validity, it has low internal validity and the measurements are indirect. And it is also low in ecological validity. However, the standing vertical jump does help assess power, which is needed in football, as it's the speed at which the muscles can contract. and therefore their limbs can move faster to block, pass or shoot with the ball. This test that we are using doesn't require much equipment, just a suitable wall and a way to measure. Ideally, we would use a gold standard test where they use a jump mat, which would give us far more information on the actual height of the jump and the time it takes to do the jump. When you're measuring against a wall, it can be quite difficult to see how high a participant has jumped, because if they're jumping, then they're either going to be too focused on trying to make a mark on the wall where they've jumped to, so their jump won't be as high, or the person measuring won't be able to get an accurate height because they won't be able to stand at the same height that the person's jumping to. They're going to be too short, obviously, because it's a jump. A flexibility test is a sit and reach test. The reliability will depend on the amount of time the subject has spent warming up and stretching their muscles. So if Harry just went into this test and just sort of sat on the floor and did a sit and reach test, it's not going to be half as good as if he does a 10-minute warm-up and stretches all of his muscles out beforehand. However, generally, if they're doing this correct warm-up, then they will get similar results each time, which will provide you with an average. So we can do a best of 3 for this test. The validity is this test only measures the flexibility of the lower back and the hamstrings. It's not measuring the flexibility of like the full body, like the arms and the legs. And however, being flexible is a need for our client, because it allows footballers specifically a wider range of motion, and it reduces their chance of injury. So we don't want him to re-injure his ACL. This would be really stupid. However, this test is a little bit less accessible to Harry because he has sustained this injury before. So trying to test flexibility on this injury means he's probably not going to be as flexible as we would like. And when training, we have to be careful that we don't sort of overdo it. For coordination and the alternate hand wall test, the reliability is quite high because it can be tested and retested. Different time limits, so whether he does 30 seconds, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, so on, can be compared to different data. There's lots of different normative tables used for this. There is a low validity in comparison to the gold standard. So a gold standard test for this will be the speed of light test, where a specialist piece of equipment will sort of glow up a button sort of thing in colour, and you would smack it as fast as you can, and it will record on a computer how long it took you to hit the light in comparison to how fast it showed up. Whereas an alternate hand wall test can be done at a very slow pace or a fast pace, just depending on the day. Footballers, however, themselves need coordination in order to receive the ball and pass accurately. The participant only needs access here to a suitable ball and a flat wall. So we don't need very specialist equipment here at all. But this is what we have access to at this time. The speed test is a 30-metre sprint, so reliability and validity are both improved if we can use timing gates. However, we don't currently have access to this. The reliability depends on how strictly the test is conducted. How the participant starts at the start, and whether they run all the way to the end and they don't slow down before the end, which obviously we don't want them to do. Speed here is essential for footballers. They must prevent the offensive players from making runs past them. And the easiest way for teams to score is to slide through balls to wingers and strikers trying to get past the back line. So defenders need to have the speed to catch up with them quickly. They must be able to run down the pitch at a fast pace, and they can't get worn out doing this. They need to have a fast recovery time. So as much as he needs to be able to do a 30-metre sprint, he then also needs to be able to recover and complete another 30-metre sprint not long after this one.